We appreciate everyone being here today for this important hearing. We'll start with opening statements. Chairs recognize what a difference a few years make. 4 years ago, President Trump was banned from all platforms, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Today, he has his own platform. He's back on all the others. And of course, he's President of the United States. 4 years ago, Democrat members of Congress sent a letter to telecommunication companies pressuring them to kick Fox and Newsmax off of a cable network. Today, both are still on. Both are doing fine. Fox has more viewers than MSNBC and CNN combined. 4 years ago, the White House was actively pressuring big tech to censor Americans. You don't have to take my word for it. Mark Zuckerberg wrote the committee a letter, told us it was going on. He said, the Biden administration pressured us to censor. We did it. We're sorry. We ain't going to do it anymore. Today, they've changed their policies, got rid of the independent fact checkers, and actually embraced the First Amendment. Imagine that. And maybe the best example of what they were doing happened on the third day of the administration. An example we've highlighted many times in this committee in the last Congress. Third day of the Biden administration, there was an email sent from Clark Humphrey to Twitter. Email said, wanted to flag the below tweet, and we hope you can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP. Take down this tweet as soon as possible. And who was the tweet by? Who did the tweet? The guy who's going to be named Secretary of Health and Human Services here sometime this week, Robert F. Kennedy, who just happened to be the guy who was going to run against the very people trying to take down the tweet. What did the tweet say? Hank Aaron's tragic death is part of a wave of suspicious death among elderly closely following administration of the vaccine. He received the vaccine on January 5th to inspire other Black Americans to get the vaccine. There is not one thing in that two-sentence tweet that's not true. Absolutely true. But the Biden administration was pressured to take it down. That's when the term, actually it's Mr. Schellenberg's term, the censorship-industrial complex, that's what it is right there, front and center, and it's much broader than that. By the way, the guy who authored this tweet, who's going to be voted by the United States Senate to be the next Secretary of Health and Human Services, we had him as a witness in front of this committee 2 years ago. And when RFK Jr. came in to testify, Democrats made a motion to go to executive session, kick everyone out, so that no one could hear what RFK Jr. was going to testify to in a hearing on censorship. You can't make this stuff up. 2 years ago, we learned that 51 former Intel officials lied to the country when they said the Hunter Biden laptop story had all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. Today, all 51 of those people have lost their security clearance. A few years ago, GARM, the misnamed Global Alliance for Responsible Media, was coordinating an effort with major advertisers to limit ads on conservative platforms and websites. Today, GARM is out of business. Climate Action 100 a few years ago coordinated an effort of financial institutions to pressure companies to reduce oil and gas emissions and production. Today, Climate Action 100 out of business. A few years ago, the Stanford Internet Observatory was working. Today, they're out of business. NZAM was doing the same thing a few years ago. Today, they've stopped operation. What a difference a few years can make. And so much of this change started in October of 2022 when Elon Musk purchased Twitter. I think he said something like, I didn't spend $44 billion to buy Twitter. I spent $44 billion to save the First Amendment. And of course, that effort began with the Twitter files. And two of the Twitter files authors are with us today as witnesses. Matt Taibbi wrote the very first Twitter file, and I think 11 or 12 others over the time that all that information was coming out. Mr. Schellenberger was also an author, and as I said earlier, he's the guy who coined the term the censorship-industrial complex. Big government working with big universities, working with other government agencies, the White House working in all this, pressuring big tech to censor Americans' speech. Both Democrats, both award-winning journalists, both Democrats at the time when they testified last Congress, both award-winning journalists, both testified multiple times in front of this committee last Congress. And what was their reward for coming forward and defending the First Amendment? They were attacked. They were referred to in this committee as so-called journalists, even though they won all kinds of awards and are best-selling authors. They were asked to disclose their sources in a hearing by Democrats in front of this committee. And they were named personally in a letter by the FTC chair, Lena Khan, when Ms. Khan asked Elon Musk who were the journalists you were talking to. And of course, maybe most importantly, we all remember that at the very moment Mr. Taibbi was testifying in front of this committee, the IRS was knocking on his door. Just one big coincidence. Very time he's talking to this committee, testifying in front of this committee, the IRS was knocking on his door. Ms. Subramanya was targeted for covering the trucker blockade in Canada. She also testified last year in front of this committee, and she warned us. She was ahead of her time. She warned us about what was coming in Europe and around the world with the censorship efforts we're seeing in other Western nations. One of the things she said when she testified almost 2 years ago, she said, "What is under threat is a core value of Western civilization." Never forget that. Powerful statement, and that's what's at stake here. So I appreciate the work you've all done, what we've been able to uncover. Appreciate the work of the president and Mr. Musk and what he's started with the Twitter files, and then what we were able to do with all these other platforms and the dramatic change we have seen. But I am nervous about what's happening in Europe because it's the Digital Services Act they are using to pressure tech companies to censor globally, which impacts Americans as well. And this is something the committee is going to look into as we move forward. But I want to thank you all for being here today. And with that, I would recognize the ranking member.